Welcome everyone to Skills Connect. This is a series where we have conversations with bold and responsible change makers. And I've left my spiciest one to the end of the year because I know this is going to be a whole pile of fun. I'm Siobhan Savage. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Reejig. And today we're exploring the world of evolving skills and tasks with the one and only Gordon Ritchie. So welcome. How are you?
I'm great, Siobhan. Thanks very much. I'm looking forward to a spicy conversation as you've teed it up there.
I
Yeah.
know. For context, for those on the call as well, the reason why I thought it would be great to end the year with Gordon. So when we were going through our journey of trying to figure out skills, the task part, Gordon was one of the first people that I spoke to. Probably, well, where was it? Unleash Your HR Tech, what, 2 years ago?
It was, yeah, in Las Vegas. Yep, HR Tech.
Yeah, and I was like, this is what I'm doing, trying to feel out. And you were one of the few people that told me it wasn't a stupid idea. So yeah, this is why I thought it would be really awesome for us to get together and have that conversation. A little bit of background as well, folks, for anyone who doesn't know Gordon. If you don't, you should know him because he's awesome. So he spent pretty much his whole career in the skill space. He hasn't just started doing it over the last couple of years. He has been doing this from right early in his career, from having in his own businesses to working for multiple different vendors, like the likes of Skyhive and others. He focuses deeply on skills architecture as a strategy. And he now works for the awesome folks at the Skills Collective, which are a consultancy that are really focused on helping customers kind of see through the noise of this space and actually solve a real problem, which is the approach that I really like about what they're taking. I think their description, Gordon, is like no bullshit skills is the way that the folks there
Yep.
talk, which I think is pretty refreshing right now when customers are trying to figure out what to do. So welcome.
Thanks, Siobhan. Yeah, I mean, it's the journey has been long and varied to get to this point. And when we met and connected, it's like great, a real kind of light there. So yeah, looking forward to the discussion and uh, talking about the tasks and skills.
I love it. So before we get into everything about sort of my perspective of the world, tell me, like, why did you fall in love with skills and stay so long? Like, tell us about that journey, because I think there's not a lot of folks that have your sort of length and depth and
Hmm.
breadth of expertise in the market. Like, tell me about the love there. What happened?
Yeah, it's a great question. I've been fortunate to have people see potential and offer me opportunities that wouldn't necessarily look a great fit for on paper. And my dad said to me, he said, if people are asking you to do something, they're not looking for you to fail. So you
Mm,
should take them. And so I've taken some of those opportunities and they've moved me from the UK to the US, from starting my own company to other organizations. But I think the through line really is it shouldn't be about the luck of who you know, right? Being able to demonstrate and describe your capabilities and have people recognize that through the natural language of work and open up those doors, that should be for everybody. And so
yeah,
that's really part of why I've stuck with it.
love that.
I've tried to get away from it a couple of times. I've made some decisions to move away, but it keeps coming back.
Hmm.
And here I am. Call me a
Yeah.
sucker for punishment.
No, I think I honestly think it's lovely if you've got a deep passion about something and you're really good at it. That's really the sweet spot of when work becomes really meaningful. So I love that and I think the thing that we've always kind of synced on as well as being like my love, very similarly to you, is about how do I have as much impact in the world as possible. And in order to achieve that, I got to start with the work and understanding what's happening to enable this recurring impact.
Yeah.
So I completely agree with you. And I think that's probably why this space is so lovely, that you got really passionate folks who want to make a difference. And most of the folks are typically like that, although there's other shadows to everything. I think that there is this genuine need for folks in the HR in the people leader space, in the vendor space that want to change the world. So yay to them. So we've talked about the falling in love. One of my first experiences when I came to New York was I had a big dinner with a whole pile of folks, and a lot of the folks, maybe let's say about 80% of them, were now falling out of love with skills. You're privileged to have access to customers who are thinking about it, have tried it, are in the middle of it, in the messy middle. What is happening in the space right now? Why is there a sentiment shift towards skills?
Yeah, it's interesting. Through my journey, I mean, it's interesting some of the company names that are coming back to the headlines that I worked with putting skills taxonomies in place 10 years ago.
Mm.
But they centralized those projects. It was somebody's passion project, as we were just kind of alluding to, but it wasn't embedded in the organization. There was no distributed ownership, I guess. It was an HR project done to you and not for you or with you in terms of how's it actually going to benefit the job that I have to do today?
Yeah.
Does it fall into, oh, it's just another performance process? And even years ago, organizations made a difference. That I've seen people's career paths 10 years ago in the tech that we had then be illuminated, and people make kind of career changes that have been possible. Um, and I think that's part of what's also kept me in is the potential has always been real and true, but we've just got better at being able to distribute it and put it into the hands of those who can take an action about it. I think the falling out of love with it is there's been so much value selling by consulting firms and vendors about, well,
I was one of those.
hey, been there too. I mean, and I think that's part of the practical realization that I've been coming to very quickly in the last couple of years. I mean, people who've known me a long time, I've been very able to get on the big picture, on the soapbox and the big picture of it. But how do we make it real? And the purist versus the practical is where we need to be today. And the kind of the value selling of the hypothetical career path transparency, or we're going to change your agility and innovation. Here's the easy button. If you just deploy this product, it will all happen magically.
Yeah.
And the technology is the easiest part of the problem to solve, right? Turning it on, great. But the process and the people are the hard parts. And a lot of the SaaS solutions underplay that. They oversimplify. Here's some of the groundwork. You could even do a lot with skills with your current tech stack. You don't need to go and buy a new product. If you change the culture and process and have people think differently, flip the thinking about where they're going.
Yeah.
And I think, I don't know that I see people falling out of love. I think I see them becoming more pragmatic and appreciative of the work that's needed, and the number of job roles that have skills in them as skills program managers, as skills taxonomy curators, that's emerging in the corporate HR space right now. Just saw one at Lego a few weeks ago. You see them coming up more and more now. Bristol Myers is looking for skills and talent architecture people in the job title. That's commitment. So I think they've gone past the honeymoon phase. They've kind of
Yeah.
gone down the slope of disillusionment, if you want to take the hype cycle curve, and
Yeah.
they're now getting to the realistic investment of effort that it's going to take.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, I mean, going back to the part that I mentioned at the beginning. So when I met you, I mean, we've known each other for as long as I think Reejig has existed via my team. But I
Yeah.
think where I really started to have those conversations with you was we had just come out of 12 months of absolute hell on the Reejig side, where and I'm pretty open about this because I think it's really important for everyone to know this, because it's part of what will help folks not make the same mistakes that we have seen. And this is part of failure, innovation. Like I believe that you have to fail in order to move forward. And what we had found was, and by the way, for anyone who doesn't know what Reejig does, like we had done what everyone else had done in the vendor space. Like it's all kind of the same. The approaches are pretty much the same. Connecting in big, like, massive amounts of data, creating a big skills cloud, inferring it or extracting it out of context in terms of job descriptions, job architectures, people, etc. And that all in theory sounds great. But to your point about the hype cycle and then the so what, we were finding so many kind of key themes happening at the same time. So one, we were seeing that the match quality wasn't good. It was okay, but I would say that a human would do way better. And that's just being, if you look at all matches, you're probably going to see a very similar result. And I couldn't understand why that was happening. So that was happening at the same time. Career pathway models, very like not sensible, like just not really what you would expect to see. The skill extraction, whether you're doing that through pulling out all of the system data across your ATS, your HRS, your public data, when you pull that amount of data, the data is not harmonized to the rest of the org. Therefore, if the talent team are over making these decisions on their island, and then you've got the learning team over here making decisions on their island, none of this actually works. Like it doesn't, and it will fail. So we learned that lesson. And the other thing that we find was like in really tricky customers, we had some really tricky customers that were like deskless workers, and the quality of the data wasn't there at all. And I'm stepped back from product as CEO. Like I'm there, I'm part of vision, but I'm not on the day-to-day stuff. What was really interesting was then to see that why is all of these things happening at the same time? And I honestly am so grateful for this experience, because what we ended up doing was going, stop. We're going to stop and we're going to be really clear on like, why are all of these things happening? You know what I mean? Like, why is it that the match, why is the skill the currency between job and worker? We started having these really day zero like thoughts around like what is happening. And the other thing that we did, which really, this was like the tipping point for me of like, I've had enough. Generative AI it was very early, started to come in. I wanted to get deep in it. I wanted to understand, the tech market at the same time is crashing. I've got shareholders and expectations to run. Operational efficiency is now the thing. Why did you grow so quick was the question, even though everyone told everyone to grow really quickly. So it was like, okay, we got to figure this thing out. And we built a model that could predict what skills would likely be impacted in the future through generative AI. And it was crap. It was terrible. It was crap. So that kind of all together at the same time. And I think when I met you, I had just cracked it. I was in beta testing. I was ripping out current customers' environments where we had then went from one big skills cloud, which we put in the bin, to then we built 23 different industry specific work ontologies. And the reason that we did this was because we found that the work data was the missing link. The way that HR are describing jobs is not how the business speaks. So that was like really big, like simple learning. And that they're trying to and I'm an ex-workforce strategist, so I can say this, and like I was doing that too in my previous career, where we were creating this language to make sure that everything made sense in a hierarchical order, but it doesn't make sense to the business. And what we were also finding was no customers had any quality understanding of their work and their jobs. They had job adverts and everyone wrote the job advert in a completely different way. Job descriptions were completely a mess. We had talent acquisition over here, describing the job in one way, in one customer alone. So Reckitt, I had the head of talent globally from Reckitt on a Skills Connect last week, and her and I discovered this at the same time. The same recruiters in the same office on the same job all had completely different ways of describing the same job. And then if you look at succession planning and learning, there's this complete differences of view. And if you imagine then an AI trying to operate in that environment, it doesn't work. The AI drifts. Even if you train it really well in the beginning, it drifts into this like messy middle part where it doesn't. So that's why we ended up building what we called the work ontology. And at the time, whenever I was talking to you, we were like, is it one industry ontology, or is it every industry has to have depth and breadth? And we landed on every industry needs to be unique, because every industry has a universe of jobs. And within those jobs, what are all the general tasks that folks would typically take? And then what are the skills required to complete those tasks? And then expertise became really important, because a healthcare project manager is very different than a project manager in construction. And the expertise and understanding of that became a really important thing for us to learn at an industry level. So that was where I think I was just over my nervous breakdown of like trying to but you got to understand as well, like, can you imagine being in a vendor and spending $40 million on something and realizing, I don't reckon that this is going to solve it. And we tried so many different ways. We tried all of the approaches and tested all of them. And the one thing that would stick and work was the work ontology. It changed the matches. It helped us have task data to understand, if you think about that whole thing I keep talking about, people have skills, jobs have tasks, tasks need skills, and AI automates the task, not the skill. And that became our ruling principle for thinking about this now, so that we didn't drift into this other world. And we were part of the vendors that were kind of saying the same, we're all saying and promoting the consultants, everyone was on this bandwagon together, right? So for us, it was really important then to share why we have done, it's not like we've pivoted, we have evolved. That's the way I would describe it in my team.
Yeah, and I think a lot of what you've just been describing is the context, right? That's the crucial piece of how you apply the skills that the person has in the context. I could go do a PMI course and I could go apply it in healthcare, or I could apply it in the insurance industry. But the domain knowledge around the risks or the elements that you navigate and mitigate and manage, those are industry specific. And I mean, I think just before you and I met around this, I'd started kind of almost as heretic to my own background around skills, right? Lists of skill nouns will not get us where we need to be. I don't come home and when somebody says, well, what did you do today at work, Gordon? I don't say, well, I did some effective communication, critical thinking, and Python level 3. We don't talk that way,
And my
right?
masterly level is
Exactly. The natural language of work is the outcome, it's the task. And that's, for me, I think that's part of the missing link, if you will, in the kind of in the ecosystem or evolutionary path, is getting back to connecting to what we do at the coalface every day, to the skills that I apply to that.
Yep. Yeah. And I think we were tagged in a similar post the other day, skills versus tasks. And we were
Yeah.
both pretty resistant to it's not one or the other. It's
Yes.
not, and we should not create it being a one and another. That's my take. What do you think around that whole, because that's what it's going to be next year. It'll be like, oh, skills are wrong, tasks is hot, skills is out. What do you think is going to be that world?
Yeah. Absolutely. It's a skills and tasks world. Just there's no doubt about it. The vendors have created a bit of a myth of a fast track, job titles to skills, skipping over the tasks and capabilities. We'll just go straight to skills matching because it's low hanging fruit. If you apply mathematical data science to go look for nouns in text, that's easy, right? That's version 1. But then you get stuck there, and the number of times that delivery driver is blacklisted as a career match because it connects to results driven in the CEO profile, and the CEO gets recommended delivery driver on their career path.
Yeah.
It's nuts.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I've seen that 100 times
Yeah.
in the machine learning, and it gets manually blacklisted as well. We can't match that anymore. But I think the skills and tasks are important. There's no such, it's not a new idea, right? We used to
Great.
do job task evaluation.
Yep.
there's a whole profession around, okay, let's look at the job of work that the business needs us to do. Let's group those like things together. If we can automate them in a production line, let's do that. And if not, let's understand and observe people doing those things.
Yeah.
And those tasks change less frequently than skills. And we all get bent out of shape about the half-life of skills, which if I see another post saying, oh, it's now 2 to 5 years, I've been using that statistic from research that was written 20 years ago,
Yeah.
and it was 2 to 5 years then.
Yep.
So
Yep.
let's stop using that. We know it's changing. There's all sorts of perverted actions that creates us to think about. But I think that putting the task piece up front and then looking for the skills, it's absolutely the and discussion.
Yep. I think the way that you're thinking about it is very similar to the way that we've kind of thought about it. Like, people have skills, but if you do the pub test and you call a manager in your business, what are they going to say? They don't call you up and say, I would like Python and effective communication. They call you up and say, I need these things done now. And
Yes.
I'm going to look for, and that was you know what I did during my mini nervous breakdown? I'm joking, by the way, when I say this, I was fine. I was looking at this very similar to like day zero. I was like, let's actually call, I used to work in the business before, and I called some of the business leaders that I used to work and represent and support in my old career, and none of them spoke in the way that we were describing it. And then I started to branch out a little bit. So I think if anyone's on this, talk to the business about how they naturally speak, because that's actually going to be the thing that's going to work from a transformation perspective, rather than trying to code a language and get everyone to learn this language and train this language. It's not easy for them. And I think one of the questions that Bob has asked in the chat as well was like, where do skills, validation, and proficiency fit in? So if you're connecting into task, and I've got a very strong point of view on this one, but what do you reckon? How does that whole thing fit in with tasks?
So when I saw the question pop in, it's like, absolutely. So I'll put the IBM Talent Frameworks as a product data set that I used to manage a skills taxonomy. We articulated proficiency levels uniquely for each skill. So what does level 1 look like for Python? What does level 2 look like on a scale of good, right? Progressive, beginner to mastery. And that's colored a lot of my thinking about the specificity needed and connected to tasks, because good looks like observable, demonstrable delivery in context. That's how you can see somebody in practice using those skills and assess or validate their capability and proficiency in performance. Just having a list of nouns and a generic 1 through 5 rubric of proficiency levels, yes, it's helpful. It's better than not understanding a scale, but the less specific it is, the less helpful it can be. There's still room for bias and subjectivity.
Yep.
And I think the task context and the skill knowledge is that's where, if you don't have those, you're not able to demonstrate, provide evidence, validate that somebody can do something. And we'll end up with the certification wars that we had in the early 2000s from the vendors, right? Well, I'm a Microsoft system engineer, or I'm an engineer of Microsoft systems, two different authenticating bodies. Which certificate is correct about the skill set that you have as a network engineer? And it will fall back into the brand wars of the authority who's given that certificate, not actually the quality of the certificate. But the tasks is context, the skills is the tools that you use to do it, and that's where the validation and proficiency piece is key as well.
Yeah. I mean, this was one of the ones that I've been debating in the most lovely way with a customer on. And I believe that the workforce has a whole pile of work that's being done. and all of the tasks are being done. Right now, there is no one system that tells you what is all the work. Like Jira has it for R&D, and tasks are in Jira, and it's in multiple different places, right? But at the end of the day, the skills proficiency thing kind of goes away whenever, and is less relevant in a world where you know that Jane is doing this task, and that she's completed the task, and she's done it at a high level of quality. The task completion becomes more valuable data. And then in a world, right? Imagine you've got Jane and you've got Bob, and you're looking at the tasks. You then start to measure for different things. You start to look at velocity. Like, is one faster and output faster than the other? Is quality better in the other? So skill proficiency becomes less of a thing that we should be caring about in a world where we're going to start understanding more about actual work. So it's been a really interesting debate, and I've had lots of sleepless nights back and forth. And Yelena Moldova from Microsoft is awesome, because the way that she's been challenging me and we've been challenging each other is to really think about this in a way where it's like, hold on a second, the world will move towards work and tasks because it has to adopt and evolve this new world of AI and robotics, and because we need that data. So then what happens to skills? So I don't think it's a tomorrow that it's going to happen, that we'll know all the work that's being done, but I do think the future of this space will become workforce intelligence, which will understand all of the work that's being done and be able to understand. You look at all the different products that are now looking inside their systems, like Teams and Docs and, Salesforce and all the major systems. We can see the work that's being done. It's about how do you connect that up into a meaningful way? And then is the evidence, to your point of task completion, then the ability to have the capability to actually complete that task? And I think it becomes a battle that we probably don't need to worry about so much in terms of proficiency, because that's one of the ones that gets people going quite a bit, right?
It does, yes. And often because it's abstracted from the work, it's an HR process. Well, we need data on proficiency. Well, okay, so we can do that, right? But what are you going to do with it? What is it going to drive? Is it actually going to help somebody do the task better? Or is it just a data collection exercise from well, we need to understand skills gaps, but if you're not going to act on it or give it to the person who it's about to help them develop, and when they're asked or stretched to do the next more complex version of the task, hey, that marketing campaign you did was great, but now we've got a omni-channel multi-audience thing that we need to do.
Yeah.
Here's what that looks like, or we want to stretch you to do that. That's when we start really extending and developing people and giving them those opportunities that I guess I said in my intro about what we need to provide everybody the chance to grow into those. Just matching people at 100% skills fit. Where's the growth opportunity for that?
Yeah.
If is the sweet spot 70 to 80% fit, and then you've got to stretch into the expertise and context. That's where I think people feel purposeful and challenged and engaged. Just getting matched to 100% fit, not great.
Yeah. Esther asked a really good question. So when you have a legal requirement, and given who they are as an organization, when you think about compliance, they have to document skills, and they have to be validating and documenting the skill validation. How would you fit such requirements into the skills logic? So if it's a compliance thing and I'm assuming this would be like, train drivers and more technical, like railway design and things like my previous career. But what do you think?
So in terms of the assessment of the skills, I mean, you can't do that compliance check if you haven't documented what the task is. I must not go through a red light or two red lights, or whatever the train driver analogy is, or without that detail, it's difficult to demonstrate how the assessment has validated that the person is complying. So I guess I would say, I mean, more detail of the task to the skill is crucial.
Mhm.
In the learning industry, for example, we've moved very much in instructional design to outcomes-based design, whether it's syllabus, and that's the kind of compliance check. If you go on a course, have I learned and can I demonstrate these outcomes? Check, check, check. Yes, I've exited that course. Outcomes are like tasks,
Yeah,
and
I
those
agree.
instructional designers will do a bunch of task analysis to understand what the outcomes are to
Yeah,
get there.
yeah.
Um,
And I think
so
that
I,
what
I
you're
just see it
saying
part
links.
of the cycle.
I think it's like there's a triangulation in terms of the validation of the skill itself. There is the manager validating the individual's ability to complete the work and do the job that they're actually assigned to do. So there's that component of it in action. There is the HR version of that, which is the assessment centers and any of the things that we put folks in, whether we're sending them to third parties. Like in my previous career, we were heavily governed around railway design for obvious reasons and bridge design, and they had to go third party to get those skills validated in order for us to put them onto major projects.
Yeah,
So there is that level of like, HR-led validation where we're helping the business actually make sure that there's validation. Then there is the individual sort of self-validation, which is probably more like I'm saying I have these, but again, you're still going to have to validate them. But where I think it will go to will be that evidence of ability to complete that in action while doing the work itself. And that is example of like where folks are actually completing their task base, whether it's in Salesforce or whether it's in Jira or whether it's in ServiceNow or in Microsoft or any of the ways in which work is being captured. We will be able to see the evidence of that task completion. But it's a really good question, Esther, because I feel like in highly regulated environments, especially when it comes to safety, there is something that we're going to have to think about when it comes to how do you then validate the skill, and obviously adding in what Gordon said as well about the actual learning completion, like in the banks and the compliance area around risk and cyber and all of that demonstrated ability that you have processed, consumed, and can demonstrate, that you have learned this new skill. I think it's a combination. I don't think it's going to be an easier solve, but it is, I think, bracketed into the way that we're thinking about that sort of work in action.
yeah. And I mean, the compliance thing is, it's a challenge, right? Have 100% of your employees gone through the sexual harassment course? How many of them actually have changed their behavior or modified their behavior as opposed to just let it play in the background whilst they eat their breakfast or whatever they're doing? It's unknown, but you can demonstrate that you have complied with the requirement that your workforce has done all of this. That's the worst kind of compliance confirmation, but it's a liability risk. Is it actually going to improve somebody's safety in the workplace? Who
Yep.
knows? But it's the behavior change versus just the liability compliance piece, and that's a tough trade-off to be from an investment standpoint. But you asked a little bit about what 2025 might be, and I think Esther's question is kind of touching on that for me as one of the things that I think I see. I sort of predicted it for 2024, and I think the second half of the year I've seen it more and more, but it is that assessment piece of skills and the practice and failure place, the comfort, the vulnerability of being able to assess, not just pass a pass-fail exam. I think assessment's going to be a big drumbeat for 2025.
Yeah. I'm going to think about this one offline because I don't think I think there's more to this. Esther, I'm going to come back to you with some deeper thoughts. In terms of 2025, so when you and I spoke about this over 2 years ago, like the tasking, to your point, it's not new. It's basic first principle thinking. Like this is not a
Mm-hmm.
invention by anyone. It's what's being done for years. I think the difference between back then and now is the ability and availability of technology to enable this at scale. This is where I think, everyone's like some people don't know about it, or some people like you or like, yeah, of course, that was what, was happening. When people would sit in hospitals and watch what the nurses were doing to figure out what they were doing, and then write it on a spreadsheet. And then I remember back then too, like I remember that whole part. So tasks is not like new. Tasks is like a first principle thinking in terms of what we need to solve our complex workforce strategies at any level. I think the thing which is really interesting though is like 2 years ago when I did that around my product, I got a lot of feedback, basically somewhere politely along the lines of, this is a stupid idea and no one's going to go against skills based, and like the world will say no. And like, if my growth is anything to go by, that's not true, because we are, and especially as I've moved into the US, and I think it might be because the US market is more mature than it went first down the skills path. So they're coming out the other end of like all their learnings. And there is like an instant conversation with folks where it's like, yes, that was the part we found because of X, Y, and Z, that in our journey that we noticed that difference. Like, why do you think everyone will now start? Well, everyone is starting to talk about this. It's becoming a very common trend, which we kind of thought would happen. Why do you think that folks are now starting to shout about this?
So I think a couple of things to what you said. The US market is interesting. It's so huge that there are some people who've made the kind of first move, who've learned those lessons. There's still an enormous number of employers and organizations who haven't even started thinking about skills, right? So there's still a lot of version 1 lessons to be learned. And if we can do anything to accelerate them to not have to go through that pain, that's
Yeah.
a big win.
Yep.
And I do see some of that. We were just talking actually in the green room about some of the Nordic based organizations that are actually sort of come out of a manufacturing space, but are thinking about how that applies to knowledge work and how that relates. And I think AI is playing a part of that. And Giles made a comment about work without jobs. I think from a knowledge work perspective, we're all typing into AI, asking it to help us do things. And we're kind of crowdsourcing into that model the tasks, the voodoo of knowledge work that we do, right? That has been poorly articulated. You were talking about job descriptions earlier. Largely treated as text, not as data, but they're being used as data now to define job taxonomies or to set that. Yet we still manage them badly in Word, and there's no version control, and those elements create chaos in organizations. But I think that's getting back to where the discipline of tasks and skills is going to be important. It might be that AI takes us there in a kind of bring your own device mode next year, where we all brought our mobile phones 20 years ago and corporate IT had to figure out how to incorporate them. We use it as AI use expands around the tasks that we're using it for. How do we embrace and understand what we're asking it to do to capture that?
Yeah. Yeah. And Giles was saying the work without jobs. So Raven from Mercer, I remember reading that years ago. I love that concept of work without jobs. I don't think it's going to happen yet. I think it's a future, but if I put the link into the channel, if you're looking for a really strong read over Christmas, that's a great book. And the way
it is a great book.
Go and think about it is it'll bring you forward, and we're going to have to pull back a bit to get the kind of foundations right to then move forward to that world. But yeah. I love their work. I think what they're doing is very complementary to the way that, we've practically been thinking about the task component. It feels like it's based off the same first principle thinking.
And he and I talked about it a little bit just after he published it, and I read it too. And I think that atomization, the atomic nature of skills, has scooted past, to your point, we've got to take a step back to the individual trees in the forest, and we need to step back to see the context. To Giles's point, I mean, we will always have a name for a collection of tasks that I'm going to ask somebody to do, or I'm asked to do, right? Whether it's a gig, a project, a role, a position, we'll always have something that's a collection of things that you need to do, right? Whether we call it a job, who knows?
Yeah.
But there'll always be a collection, because that's what we as people like
Yeah.
to do. Okay, let's put it in a box, say, hey, Siobhan, can you go create this business strategy? That's a
Yeah.
bunch of tasks, but we're going to give you that project, right? So
Yeah.
we'll always have some collective name for groups of like tasks that get you to an end point.
Yeah, one of the things we tested in our product in R&D was the clustering of tasks. So you've got the high level task, which is the kind of overarching, it's like the title of the task, and then you've got the subtasks within that, and then you go deeper into like a micro, it's not even a task, it was more like an action, right? So this is where we had looked at that whole view of task, and I think trying to correlate that where we remove the job out, and could we see like little heat maps of like understanding tasks. And I think I love the concept of that, but I think at a practical level, like we're just getting our head around skills, you know, like as an industry, like going and removing the job. And also like we had another webinar not so long ago, and one of the really awesome CLOs put into the chat that, you know, folks love being connected to their job. It's part of their meaning, you know, like some people really love, like, you know, I'm a barista and I love working with my team and I love this job, and they're really passionate about it and they feel like it's their thing. So it kind of becomes a different world to the employee. How do I identify as well? And I think this is where, I mean, check the book out, it's brilliant. But I do see that the world is going to head towards that. One of the things that I think I have been most frustrated about as a vendor is the lack of harmonization. So one of the biggest problems to solve, I think, is having a system in TA with a language. You've got like all of these different like systems, and even like the big systems that are promising, you know, the one skills language for the whole business, there is still a lack of common language. What do you see in that space? Because you're, you know, hands in hand with the customer, helping them craft this. Like, what is the damage of that situation? Because I think I can tell you from a vendor perspective, but it'll sound like a sales pitch. Like, what do you see whenever you're looking at that harmonization when it's not in place? Like, it causes what? Like, what happens if you're not thinking about harmonization?
Yeah, I mean, and I've been in the vendor space too, so I've made the same kind of discussion and sales points about the one ring to rule them all kind of skill taxonomy, which is it's a bit of a fool's errand, frankly. And you and I have talked over this year about the harmonization and orchestration of those things. And I mean, if it's not there, you end up with disconnected data sets that you can't make intelligent decisions about. Yes, a process might be measuring itself and looking good. Let's just pick on TA, not for TA, but the funnel to hire time or whatever those data points are. Yes, we've sourced all these skills, but our actual hiring has still been on brand of college on the application. We didn't change any behaviors, but we've collected data that doesn't flow into onboarding, or it doesn't flow into quality of hire from an accelerated ramp time. If you don't have the harmony, then you aren't able to connect those data pieces. And the kind of single currency model, it doesn't in the macro talent marketplace, we all own our each fiat currency, I think. There is no single currency. We're not all trading in Bitcoin for everything around the world. Even in Europe, right, with a single currency, what you pay for a loaf of bread in Portugal is different from Germany. So the value of the single currency in the context is different. And we need to be able to understand and harmonize those local markets that might be down to the individual level as we get super sophisticated in the tech. But even within an organization, that single currency has different values, and being able to harmonize adjacent skills across finance to cybersecurity, that's a harmonization issue, not a centralization issue.
There's a harmonization and a governance thing.
Yes, absolutely.
I think there is creating that one common language of work where you are pulling together that information set. I think it's a work ontology, which is task, skills, that. Others would say it's just skills, whatever. Like, but the same thing matters. Like, if learning teams are speaking in a different language than the TA teams, and the TA teams are speaking different than how you promote people, your system is broken. Like, that is not going to work, and it's not fair on your people. So there's like that level of like fairness, that how you hire someone in versus how you're promoting them and who gets reskilled. Like, there's this whole thing of fairness. I think that you need that language to make sure that you're making good and fair decisions when it comes to your people, right? And then there is the practical level of it all just not working, because if you're trading and bartering in different languages, it all breaks down. And the final component, and I love what Success Factors play on their talent intelligence hub, is really pushing around this whole, like, here becomes the engine that they control what gets pushed in and out of the, that's their play around, the talent intelligence hub, and really their play will be to try and help that controlling the customer's environment to stop it being, skills. Because you don't want, there's a lot of the vendory type stuff that's about pulling and extracting skills. And if one skill changes, I want to be able to push that into your environment. And that's like a completely randomized, non-proven trend that's in your data. So your jobs are not going to evolve as fast as you think. So we got to be really careful in the data feeds that we're allowing to show the evolution of the job itself. And it has to be approved at a governing level, or all the work that's done when they hire you in to pull this all in place gets messed up by us from a vendor perspective, because we're just overriding everything that you've just said. So I think it's the harmonization, and then creating and make a decision as an organization on like that central, like, what did you call it? The one ring. It's like that whole take. And I think that's where you've got to work with if you've got multi vendors, it's going to be a nightmare. Like, it's going to be hard work.
And let's face it, the multi-vendor situation is a reality. We're never going to get away from that. As much as the 800-pound gorillas would love you to centralize around their integrated suite and do everything in all of their modules, what is it, 7 learning management systems on average across large enterprise?
Yeah.
Never going to get to a single stack with a single system of record. That is true. So the harmonization, the orchestration of that's crucial. And one of the points we were talking about earlier is, yes, we need that kind of centralized governance. But if that's all you have, if somebody's driving that and they leave, that's when these projects fail. And in 2 years' time, somebody else thinks they've reinvented the skills wheel, gets all hot for it and starts it again.
Yeah. And the business nuts, because they have to go through the same process again.
Exactly. So the stewardship and ownership model from the business into the governance process, the distribution of that to the business, they're the job family experts. They're the functional experts of what is it we need to do to keep the lights on of this business, right? That's the ownership that they have and the investment that they have. So they have to be able to feed that in. And Ericsson, as an example, they've done a great job of the kind of stewarding that data from the business into the governance processes. Is it a behemoth of a process? For sure. But does it give them what they need to have sticky, embedded, individual contributor understanding of skills and how it drives their work? Yeah, it does. It really works.
Yeah. I do think it's going to be a really interesting, like, you're going to have your customers that are just starting on their journey to figure this out. And my hope for them is that they get to leapfrog. Like, I hope, and my mission is to share as much of the good, the bad, and the ugly, so that folks can leapfrog and don't have to, because we all have got to innovate and move forward as an industry. It's not like one company is the champion and they win everything. It's actually us as a profession and as an industry, especially when it comes to what the opportunity exists for AI. That there is a level of, in my view, there is a pretty strong amount of reskilling and lifting and helping this community rise that we've got to help, because folks are still trying to figure out like what that looks like. So if they're starting out on their skills journey, like we need everyone to be kind of like, oh, don't do this because of that, or try this. And it's more from like, because I learned it trying X, Y, and Z, not because I'm selling you something. So like, I think that's where it's going to be really important for folks that are in charge of making these big decisions. Because at the end of the day, if we're going down this journey of transforming our organizations, if I was the person who was in charge of that project, I would want to make sure that I get this right, because it's got such high visibility from the business, the cost of it, the whole disruption of it. It's such a big, big thing. And with that in mind, like that kind of view, what do you think the trends will be like in our, like the 2025 hype cycles and trends? What do you see is going to be kind of what we're all talking about?
I mean, I mentioned one of them. I think assessment is going to be a big piece of that. How do we assess and validate that the evidence that I've done those tasks, or even that I have on the 70-20-10 model, the 10% of knowledge that I need of a skill to then be able to go apply it in the 70% end of the context of work. I see that hugely. I think we will see the AI and skills, right? So what to take advantage of the thinking there and not treat them as two separate transformation projects. As leaders look at the impact of AI on the business of their business, having that milestone zero, what are the tasks that we're looking at and the skills that are needed to do that? And is that agentic? Is that human? And what's the value difference there? I really see that we'll start to have the conversion of those two things.
Work to worker, literally.
Yes.
That's what it's going to be.
Yeah.
Work to worker, whether it's a robot, whether it's a contingent worker, whether it's one of your employees within your marketplace, it's work to worker. It's not job to job holder or person in the job. It is work to worker. That is I'm a resource management background. So my job and my bonuses were always connected to the utilization on efficiency of my organization. And the dream state for any of us in that space would be, I understand my work, I understand the workers, and I can orchestrate it at the right time. So it's no longer like the right people with the right skills at the right time stuff. It's the work to worker.
Yep. And I think what that is going to drive us to have better conversations around is not just use AI as the pejorative, right? Is it automative AI? Is it generative AI? Is it creative? Is it predictive? We'll have more understanding of those nuances and not just throw the big AI word at it and not be specific about what we're thinking it can do, because it's not perfect. We've all seen the six-fingered kind of rag pictures that it's generated and the hallucinations. And so being able to value the human part, that we can't just automate everything as much as it's brilliant, that there has to be human involvement in validating AI. We talk about validating people. We have to validate AI. And that's one of the things that the industry has been poor about, is benchmarking its own accuracy against, as you said, a human matching jobs. Can I do it faster? Yes. Is the data crap? Could be, but so faster doesn't win just because it's doing it faster. What's the quality and the benchmark of that decision making? And it kind of goes back to Esther's question too. If we're using it in hiring or work allocation, what's the defensible benchmark that pre-hire assessments have had to demonstrate for the last 30 years as a valid instrument? What's the benchmark for AI to do that? We could all run a experiment of ingesting comp salary surveys and your job architecture and say, here's your new skills architecture. Anybody you go ask in the vendor pool can do that for you. How do you know whether it's better or worse than what you have today? So being clear about that hypothesis, I think we're maturing to be better at that, and we'll see that more and more next year. That vendors are asked to kind of, okay, show me why it's better. Don't just give me some output.
And we've seen that a little bit in market.
Uh-huh.
The best experiments right now are like customers going, here's what I'll give you, and I'm going to give it to all vendors and show me what you can do. One of the things you said kind of triggered me a little bit in a scary way to think about the whole, like, so we're going to go from skills to everyone in the country building skills models to now the task thing is going to be a thing. And the thing that we learned when we built our tasks, it is very easy to create ChatGPT versions of tasks, right? But the
Sure.
point that you said, the six-fingered hand, if you're doing that at scale, it changes its mind constantly, and the quality and the output and the validation of that task will continuously differ depending on what day you ask it, the way that you ask it. There is so many different changes. So you imagine all the vendors are now going to probably run towards this task world, but they're all going to use big large language models to then infer tasks on that. We looked at that when we first started testing, and that was another version of the skills problem. So when we built our work ontologies, we physically built out them for every industry and every job, and we've got the tasks and we've had them validated by workforce strategists. And then we do the harmonization, the evolution, because we find that it would be a similar thing to the skills world of this one big skills cloud. Just guys, if you're talking to folks that are moving this space, like if that's how they do it, it's going to be a nightmare, because we looked at that and chucked it out. We've now got these kind of 23 models that I think are going to be really important, especially when you're using it for whether it's to power your existing skills frameworks, whether it's to power your AI implementation. It has to be a governed and harmonized. And I think that's the two buzzwords that, I always leave you with is like, when I finish our calls, it's always like the harmonization and the governance of the data, whether it's skills or tasks, has to be really relevant. And what advice are you sort of as a Christmas gift to folks that have dialed in and will listen to this on Spotify and on our YouTube channel? Like, what advice do you give leaders navigating this future of skills and tasks? Like, what do you think they should think about?
I mean, there's so many cliches that we end up falling back on because they're truths. Progress, not perfection, right? Don't look for the perfection on day one. Iterate towards that. That's one of the key pieces. Find something that's critical as some critical roles, right? That are key to the business. They might be high volume roles, so there might not be strategic leader roles, but there might be one role that you've got 1,000 people doing, and you can make a 1% difference to them. That's a kind of scaled factor of impact. And then you've got success to move on from. I think that's really one of the key pieces. And you just talked about job descriptions and data and what's being scraped and training models. Really think about the job descriptions as your North Star of what it is you need people to, what your business needs people to do. Right? Put the business first and treat those as mission critical data items. If you store them in Word and anybody can edit them, that's not mission critical data. If you are thinking about buying a skills intelligence solution that's going to use those job descriptions to tell you what your skill taxonomy is, if you aren't managing those jobs well to what it is you need people to do, what's the taxonomy going to get you?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the North Star that lots of people talk about. That gives you the reference to triangulate what you know about people then to align to what it is you need them to do, and the over the horizon data, the market data at scale, whether it's Lightcast or other organizations that have that enormous view of the labor market and be able to use that as part of that trifecta, the North Star of what the business operations needs people to do, what people can do and are doing, and then how does that correlate from the external market. Those are the three jewels that we try and think about from a data standpoint.
Yeah. It's really interesting. And I mean, I could talk to you for days, but we've run out of time. So thank you first to everyone who's dialed in. Thank you to Gordon for giving us his time and his wisdom. I love these conversations. If anyone on here wants to book themselves in for a personalized masterclass where we can kind of talk you through this and help you kind of think about this new world of work, you know, the QR code's there. You can go to our website or DM me. Thank you to everyone. 2025 is going to be the most disruptive, I think, year of all of our careers. I think it's going to get more all about how do we evolve work and how do we evolve the worker. I think is going to be really where I'm going to be spending my time, and I'm going to spend all of my time really driving organizations to be really bold and think about creating this new world of work at the same time as being really responsible, because we can't be leaving folks behind. So, you know, really excited to talk with folks and work with you all in the future. And happy Christmas to everyone. Hope you get an incredible break and reach out. And there's a couple of questions that I'll come back to after I've processed a little bit. I just want to make sure that I'm giving a good answer. So thank you, Gordon. Happy Christmas.
It's been wonderful, Siobhan. Thanks. Yeah, happy holidays. Merry Christmas to you. See you in 2025.
I'm getting I'm so excited. Bye, everyone.